Oasis. So definitely maybe. In the opening montage, you heard a clip from Rock and Roll Star, and now you're going to hear a clip from Live Forever.
Maybe I just wanna fly, wanna live but don't wanna die. Maybe I just wanna breathe. Maybe I just don't believe. Maybe you're the same as me. We see things I'll never see. You and I gonna live forever.
So definitely maybe by Oasis comes in at number 25 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 5 in 1994. Number 122 of all time. It's Oasis's second highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, behind 1995's What's the Story Morning Glory. This is the only album we're covering tonight that made Rolling Stone's list, coming in at number 217 there. And Oasis is ranked number 51 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums, which, if you're one of the Gallagher brothers, was probably 50 rankings too low, I would say, from for their taste. So definitely maybe was released on August 29th, 1994. It is their debut album. There's a total of 7 that they have. The most recent is 2008's Dig Out Your Soul, and it's probably going to be the last one unless, the hell freezes over. It's another one of those situations there. Their genre is Britpop and rock, influenced by the Beatles, the Smiths, the Kinks, In Spiral Carpets, Neil Young, Rolling Stones, The Jam, Stone Roses, The Who, Buffalo Springfield, Nirvana, and Mark Bolan. Their highest charting album, well, it depends on where you're talking. If you're talking in the U.S., it's 1997's Be Here Now, which hit number 2 on the Billboard charts. If you're talking about in the U.K., all 7 of them are tied at number 1 because they all hit number 1 in the U.K. The highest charting single, again, in the U.S., it's Wonderwall at number 8, but in the U.K., there's 7 that went to number 1, including Some Might Say, Don't Look Back in Anger, Do You Know What I Mean, All Around the World, Go Let It Out, The Hindu Times, Lila, The Importance of Being Idle. Important to point out that there's probably 4 songs on there that I've never heard of, which apparently speaks to just this lasting power, the staying power of Oasis in their native land.
They're like the biggest band ever, based on
that. There was even like a poll, some readers poll from UK outlet that basically asked them their greatest albums of all time, and this came in at number 1, and Sgt. Pepper came in at number 2. So, yep, they love their Oasis over across the pond there. So some history of the formation of the band. They were formed in 1991 under the original name Rain, by Paul McGuigan, also known as Gwiggs. He was on bass. Paul Arthurs, also known as Bonehead. He was on a guitar. And Tony McCarroll on drums. They also had a vocalist at the time, Chris Hutton. But they were not terribly satisfied with Mr. Hutton and his voice. And so then Bonehead invited an acquaintance of his to audition, and that was Liam Gallagher. So none of the Gallagher boys were original members of the band, oddly enough. Liam Gallagher did not like the name of the band and suggested that they change it to Oasis. This was after...
That's a very good decision by Liam right there, aesthetically.
Well, they were named after, there was a poster that because he and his brother Noel shared a bedroom growing up, and they had a poster in their room by a band called In Spiral Carpets. And they had like a list of the venues that they played, and one of them was the Oasis Leisure Center. And so that's where the name Oasis came from. And so Liam's older brother Noel, he was actually a roadie for In Spiral Carpets for a couple years. But no surprise to no one, he eventually got kicked out for his abrasive attitude and behavior. And shortly after getting kicked out, he was surprised to learn that his brother had started a band. So he went to go see Oasis in Manchester. And he was pretty impressed with what he saw. They actually asked him to be their manager at the end of the show, and he said he declined that offer, but he instead told them, I will join your band, because he had a bunch of songs that he had written. He was playing around a guitar and had written some songs. And he says, if you let me join, you can have the songs, but I'm also going to be the leader, so you're going to have to take that on. So they actually agreed to that, and so he joins the band. And for about a year and a half, 2 years, somewhere in that area, they kind of just played around. They toured. Nobody really thought much of them. Recorded some demos. They actually shared a studio with another group called Sister Lovers. And that band had a gig in Glasgow in May of 1993. And they invited Oasis to come join them. And when they were at that show playing, they only played 4 songs. But somebody that was at that show was Alan McGee. Maybe you guys recognize that name. Does that ring a bell to either of you?
No.
Alan McGee was instrumental in the success and the recording and signing of Slow Dive. We covered back then, and I think we mentioned that at that time Alan McGee was his biggest his biggest find was Oasis. So, and so he's at the show, and he's also the head of Creation Records, and he offered them a contract that night. And so they go in, they start to record this record, and it was a pretty challenging process because they could not really replicate what they were doing live in the recording studio. They went through a couple producers. The first one was a guy by the name of Dave Batchelor, who Noel knew through being his years of being a roadie. Then they got Mark Coyle, who was the person that was mixing their live shows, so they thought that he might be able to come in and recreate that sound, but he was not able to do it the way that they wanted. And they finally settled on Owen Morris, who did the majority of production on this record, and everybody felt that was the best version that they were going to be able to get. So they released released 3 singles before the album was released. They did release Supersonic in April of '94. That did pretty well, reached number 31 in the UK charts. They also released Shaker Maker, and that resulted in a lawsuit over plagiarizing for the song I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing, which is very similar to the opening verse of Shaker Maker.
I definitely wrote that down, too.
Yep.
It sounded like that.
Yep.
I mean, I wouldn't exactly call that a very difficult thing to earmark there.
Yep. The fourth single of the record, Cigarettes and Alcohol, was also accused of being
T-Rex.
plagiarized. This time, anybody guess what they were accused of plagiarizing in that song?
That riff from T-Rex from
Yeah, get it on. Good job.
Yeah, let's say T-Rex, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I didn't read anything about a lawsuit there, but yeah. So and we talked, I think, recently about Noel Gallagher plagiarizing and admitting, saying, yeah, I'm basically ripping off Imagine by John Lennon when he wrote Don't Look Back in Anger. So not afraid to take a little bit from some of his favorite songwriters, Noel Gallagher. So Live Forever, that was another single released right before the album, and people were encouraging Noel to release Slide Away as another single, but he rejected that, saying you can't have 5 singles off a debut album, so he did not want to do that. And at the time of its release, Definitely Maybe became the fastest selling debut album in UK history. I don't think it has that record now, but at the time it did. So they go off, they tour in Japan. The Japanese people love Oasis. It's like Beatlemania over there, but then they come over to the States and they're not finding the reception as warm, so they got their work cut out for them. During a gig in Los Angeles, they took a bunch of crystal meth, but they thought it was coke, so they're taking a new drug. It kept them up for days, and they end up doing a show in LA, and they're terrible. They're starting songs over again because they're on to, I think Noel had a different set list than everybody else. Everybody was just messed up. And at the end of towards the end of the performance, Liam was made offensive remarks about American audiences, and also threw his tambourine at Noel. And this whole experience led Noel to just take off. He kind of quasi quit the band and got on an airplane and flew to San Francisco to meet up with a girl that he met at a show there, and just stay at her house and talk about I'm gonna quit the band and whatever.
Oh,
and she doesn't even she's like, what are you gonna do instead? And he's like, I'm not exactly sure, actually. That's a good point. So he talks about this in a documentary called Supersonic, which a whole documentary on Oasis, which you can watch on HBO Max. And he wrote the song Talk Tonight, which was a B-side, I believe, about that experience of going to San Francisco. And he says in the documentary, I don't even remember that woman's name, but she helped him through this time. So he comes back, but he comes back a little bit of a changed person, a little bit more focused, and a little bit, less likely to put up with anybody's nonsense, including Liam's. So there's some great quotes in here about, just from Noel Gallagher, which you can't even, I don't have enough time to go through all of it, but when he's talking about Live Forever, he said he was particularly upset with kind of grunge bands and being all depressed. And he said at the time Live Forever was written in the middle of grunge and all that. And I remember Nirvana had a tune called I Hate Myself and Want to Die. And I was like, Well, I'm not fucking having that. As much as I fucking like him and all that shit, I'm not having that. I can't have people like that coming over here on Smack fucking saying that they hate themselves and they want to die. That's fucking rubbish. Kids don't need to be hearing that nonsense. So he goes off to say, you know, you trying to have more positive messages in his songs. He went on to say, seems to be that here was a guy who had everything and was miserable about it, and we had fuck all, and I still thought that getting up in the morning was the greatest fucking thing ever, because you don't know where you end up that night, and we don't have a pot to piss in, but it was fucking great, man. So he's positive there. And one final quote from Mr. Gallagher. He's kind of a man after my own heart. He's talking about lyrics versus music. He says, quote, "It's usually lyricists that will tell you that the words are fucking everything. They are not. The words don't mean shit to anybody. It's the melody is what you remember. We all whistle tunes. It's always about the melody, and that's what I do." So I'm with Noel on that. And I guess you could probably tell with some of his lyrics that they don't make a whole lot of sense sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's Oasis for you. So yeah, pretty big band, I would say. We've touched on Britpop before with the London Suede and Blur. We talked about Pulp. We covered a song of theirs, but this is the big one from the States. So Josh, let's start with you. What's your take on Definitely Maybe?
Yeah, man, this is a great album. This is it's just like everything you want from, or everything I want from, like the guitar sound to the melodies to kind of the attitude and the kind of mashup of rock and glam and maybe a sprinkle of like Stone Roses thrown in there, and just kind of the swagger and the confidence that this album has right from the jump. Every other song seems to have kind of a sing-along quality to it, or just kind of a guitar part that really works on me. They have this big rock sound that's different, you know, contrasting to Blur. It's just not as British, but I mean, and I really like that Blur sound. I'm not like degrading Blur, but this is kind of a more mass appeal sound in some ways. I find it interesting that their delivery through the mic on vocals is like effects driven. It's like there's an echo or a fuzziness to all of their lyrics. I don't know what that specific effect is. It's like they're talking through a PA or something. There's a distancing kind of quality to their lyrics that doesn't detract for me, but I thought it was interesting to note it's not clear vocally by design. Definitely picked up on the references that you that got legal trouble for. I mean, it seemed like I don't think I've listened to this album too much, but I certainly knew a lot of these songs, and it seemed like I could tell, you know, Supersonic was a hit from the moment you hear it, and they just have this quality that's really appealing to me. And this rock sound is, you know, it's definitely not grunge, but it's not post grunge either. And so I'm glad they carved their own lane out. And I like the Britpop, you know, three for three of the Britpop big four that we've covered so far. Married with Children's a funny kind of last song. Is this like an extra track too, or is it? Like...
I don't think that was. I think that
okay.
was just I think that was.
It's just kind of
on at the end.
a darkly funny acoustic song about being annoyed at a person you're in a relationship with and all the things they don't like about the person. That was pretty funny, but yeah, this is like what I want from a rock album, just all the way from top to bottom, just fun to listen to. I agree with you. The lyrics, they do not make a lot of sense, and they don't really mean a lot when you start to listen to them. It is all about the music for this band, and it is for me on this album. So thumbs up for me.
Yeah, it's so interesting to listen to this album as part of a journey through music, right? Because I enjoy Oasis, and I mean, Noel Gallagher knows his way around a chorus. The melody is lovely. The guitar parts are exactly what you'd want. I think my takeaway though is I didn't process how derivative Oasis was of nearly everything in pop music. And I couldn't help but get a little bit of a feel between the obvious borrowing of, T-Rex. I'd like to teach the world to sing Beatles themes. There's, beyond just the riff, there's a lot of T-Rex here in general.
Yeah.
And now that, I know a little bit, if we go by the idea that Britpop is all the one word names, so Blur, Pulp, right? Suede, Supergrass, these guys and stuff. Now that I've heard, I know Pulp, we haven't covered them yet, and, but we did do Razzmatazz, which... besides maybe Supersonic on this, I like better than anything on this album. I really liked that Blur album. I thought the Suede album was great. I think I'm going to go ahead and make a bold opinion here, guys, which is I think that Oasis is the least, this album, of the bands we've covered so far. It doesn't mean I don't like it. I just don't... It didn't surprise or enliven me as much as the other stuff did. It almost felt like I was listening to a cover band at times, a very good cover band, but... I guess I just didn't really realize how much in debt they were to stuff that came before them. And once I was constantly making those connections, it did take a little bit away from me. Not enough to not make this a recommend, because I like this album. And I definitely, as I was listening to it, I said, I'm coming to this revelation. I wonder if Josh and Matt are going to come there. And I kind of said, I don't think so, because I said, I think this sound is so appealing to Josh, and I think the melody is going to be so strong for Matt that there won't be a little bit of the conflict that I'm experiencing with it. But, and we'll do What's the Story, Morning Glory. I think we do Be Here Now as well. In the decade, I'm not sure. And there's no doubt, you're right, the last song's pretty funny, because Noel Gallagher's a funny dude. There's almost no better interview in rock music than Noel Gallagher. And, especially, he tells a great story about, going to LA with Morrissey and Russell Brand, right? And it's the day that, it's the day, the royal wedding happens, and people find out Morrissey's British, and he's telling the story, and just he can't help but laugh as he's telling it, where people are coming up and congratulating him on the royal wedding and stuff, which is hilarious with Morrissey. And Noel Gallagher, he's a natural bard, right? He's just a great storyteller. Their lyrics are famously awful, and they are. They mean absolutely nothing. Half the time, it just seems like he's writing stuff to have it fit. Right? To rhyme and for the melody to keep up, which it doesn't make the songs worse necessarily, but you definitely notice some of these choices of lyrics, you just almost laugh because they're so hackneyed and clearly designed to allow a melody to play out and stuff, and you're like, what even is this song about? With the exception of the last song, which clearly he wrote when he was pissed off at a girlfriend at some point. But yeah, songs like Rock and Roll Star and Supersonic, is that they're undeniable. Slide Away, right, is another one. But all of those songs sound like other songs, right? And so from in my grid, right, originality, is a piece of it. And as good as this album is, on the 1 to 6 scale, it's a 1. Everything on here has been done before, and it's sort of they're just pulling it, and they have a good album collection though, good record collection. That's my takeaway, because all the stuff that they're sampling is right there. It is very clear when you listen to this too why they're the Britpop band that broke into America, because they do. Even though Noel Gallagher has a very British accent, he sort of also transcends his Britishness into something else that's more in the rock lineage, I'd say. Kind of like how you forget the Beatles are British after a while when you hear it. And he's got an incredible voice. It's a crystal clear rock star voice, which is great. And, Noel sings later, I think famously on Wonderwall, and he's got a good voice too, actually. But you can always tell Liam's, it's just a pure rock star voice, right? So that's another positive on this. The guitar riffs are a little heavier than I imagined too, which is a positive thing for me. But I think that's my takeaway. Very enjoyable, a lot to like, but also highly derivative. And if we're gonna make fun of like Live for being derivative, like we have to make fun of this for being even more derivative to some degree of like what came before. So once again, kind of like the Live thing, I like this album a lot, but there's stuff that is complex about it for me. And certainly my hot take is that I like Park Life by Blur and I like Suede's Self-Titled better than this album.
Yeah, I think the derivativeness is valid. I certainly like picked up on that. I just like don't really care ultimately. It just works.
Well, that was what I came to. I thought that you and Matt would not care. It was just going to be too much your preferred sound to truly care about it, and that's okay. That's not me being judgy. It's just as I was thinking about it, I'm like, I wonder if they're going to get to where I get to on this.
I think you meant Liam sings Wonderwall. Noel sings Don't Look Back in Anger.
I apologize. You're right. I'm having a lot of miss. Yes, good, fair point. Yep.
So yeah, this I totally see what John is saying. Particularly just coming off the heels of Park Life by Blur, right? Yeah. That album was like, man, there's a lot of stuff happening here, and it was a good lot of stuff happening here, as opposed to some albums like. I always kind of go back to Jellyfish. Remember we covered that? It's just like, man, they're just throwing so many things there, and I don't really feel like it's gelling as much as in some places maybe, but as an overall album, not as much. That Blur album, upon a couple of listens, it's like, oh man, there's more, it's more interesting, right? It's more creative, it's more unique, right? Than something like this. This is just straight ahead rock and roll, yes, and they are unabashedly. Leaning into, we love the Beatles, right? We love the Smiths, we love the Kinks, and this is just what we're going to do. And when we do it, we're going to be the best band in the world. And screw you. If you don't like it, then you're wrong. You're an ass. Like, that's the other thing, too, that I found funny watching that documentary is that Oasis has, John, you've talked about this before, about having you want your rock stars to be rock stars, right? It's also about the image and the attitude. And they certainly had that, right? And I think that, yes, the music compared to all the other Britpop bands around this time was more conducive to an American audience for sure. But they also they got headlines, man. Like they were very quotable. Like both Liam and Noel would do and say things that would be outrageous, that would get them the press, and they leaned into that, right? And so the interviews are great, and that's part of what made them popular, right? People like that kind of
and the funny thing is, in America, we laughed at it. Like, it was kind of like, they're hilarious. There was no thing. But, like, in England, it was this big, serious thing with them and Blur. It was like picking Coke or Pepsi, right? Like, one was,
right.
It wasn't the more serious and arty. But they both were, like blue-collar kids, which was the great, funny irony of it. Yeah.
And, it wasn't like a serious thing, but it was just interesting. It's like, holy cow, they're just like, not many bands come out or artists come out and be like, yeah, we're the best fucking band in the world. like it's not even like, before their album even comes out, they're saying this stuff, and they're saying it totally.
Well, and also, and all these other bands suck is the other part of it that was part of their thing too. Yeah.
Oh, that's the other good thing. It's
like I think like U2 always thought they were the best band in the world, but they never would say like, and all these other bands suck. Right? They'd be like, there's so much good stuff, but that's what made Oasis funny.
Or make it their like life's purpose to like to like Phil Collins, like wishing Noel Gallagher has gone on record to like wish other artists got AIDS. Later on retracting that, but I mean they would say stuff like that. I hope the guys in Blur die from AIDS, and then he's like, actually I shouldn't be joking about AIDS. I'm sorry about that, but they still suck. So I think that's part of their mystique too. And then you got the sibling rivalry, and it's not even
sibling
like
rivalries.
They would be fighting with each other. It's funny in the documentary they were saying Noel was like basically like, look, what the reason this all stems from two guys that wanted to be the alpha, and that Liam, right, couldn't take the fact that I was the one writing the music, and so he tried to take the piss out of me as much as he could because he knew that I was the talent. And then Liam said, actually, I think it all started when I got pissed one night and couldn't find the light switch in our room, so I ended up just pissing all over Noel's new stereo. Like that was his like synopsis of why their rivalry started like that. So it's just they're so entertaining, right? And I think that's kind of what was appealing about them. But
Yeah.
as far as this record's concerned, yes, John, you're right. This is just straight ahead, but it's done really well. Like the energy, the music is top, the melodies are top notch. The production is great. Like this just full guitars. It's so distorted, right? It's just like, and that's actually one of the things. I don't necessarily think they were great musicians, and one of the ways you could tell that is by they're just drowning out any intricate parts that anybody might be playing, and it's just loud distortion, right? And you can hide imperfections and things like that. But they were okay with that, right? At the end of the day, they wanted you to walk away humming their songs and listening to them for years and years to come, well after all of us have died. Like you're going to be listening to these songs. Yeah, we might be assholes, but you're going to be listening to this for the rest of eternity, right? It's kind of like the way they're looking at this. And you know what? It's hard to deny that because there's just great stuff in here. And I will also say it came at a really good time because in light of all of the grunge and the stuff, because what he was talking about, there was a lot of, darker kind of, rock music or more depressed or sad music. And he's like, screw that, man. There's some great things about life and we should be positive and happy about things. And here you go. Here's a great rock record to help you do that. So it also kind of came at a time that, yes, while being derivative, it was also at the time it came out, and in the period of the 90s, it was also kind of refreshing too. And I think that's what was appealing about them as well. But yeah, I don't think there's a bad song on here. It's got some of I think Live Forever is a fantastic song.
Yep.
It's just like, as soon as I heard that, I like it just as much today as I did when I first heard it. And I loved it that first time. I think Slide Away is a great, it should have been another single. It's that's the other thing Oasis does too. And they certainly did this a lot more with Be Here Now, which I hope we covered. I don't see it on the list right now, John, but if we want to do a bonus, I might throw that in there. But that album is chock full of just overblown, long, like songs. But to me, they're so good, and Slide Away is kind of like that. It's the longest song on here. It's just so good, and I'm like, all right, if you want to make a long song and you're going to do it with that melody and that chorus, then have at it, man, because I'm here for it.
Yeah, that was my note. I like this song.
It's great. And I thought of doing it too, but like I had to put Live Forever on as the montage as the segment. And Rock and Roll Stars, just like it's the essence of Oasis. It's like that's what they wanted. They wanted to be the biggest band in the world, and it's like the definitive Oasis song in that regard. As far as a band that didn't really write lyrics that meant anything, that song did mean something because that's kind of who they were. So I don't disagree. You're right. Those other bands, and if we cover more Suede or if we get into Pulp, I have no doubt. And now that I know more about Blur, and sure we're going to learn more about them, that yes, they are more interesting. Oasis doesn't really veer away from this sound. I've got 4 of their albums and 1 compilation album, and that's the other thing too. They have a lot of great songs that never made it to albums. They did that British thing where lots of B-sides, lots of singles that were never on albums. So they kind of they do little things here and there that are a little different, but nothing like anything that we heard in that Blur album that we just covered. So if you want to knock it down a couple of pegs or 5, if you're doing your ranking out of 6 and it becomes a 1, then I can't argue with that because that's very true. But as far as an enjoyable album that's just like hitting all my buttons, yeah, it's kind of top notch, right? And they had some pretty good staying power with their other records too. So yeah, big thumbs up for me. That derivativeness does not matter to me. Is if you do it well, and you kind of and you make it your sound, which is what they're doing along with the production and with Liam's voice, which is a pretty distinctive voice. I agree, he's a great vocalist. I'm okay with that. I can put all that aside and just enjoy the record for what it is. So yeah, thumbs up for me.
Nice.
All very valid opinions, I think, across the board, and so I think that was a very good review of it, and Oasis was done well by all of our takes on it. So
all the correct opinions, takes.
All the correct opinions in a night full of correct opinions. So